Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining Parent Gauge and Parent Powered for our session, Who's Not at the Table? 3 Key Practices for Engaging Harder to Reach Families. A couple of housekeeping items as you're entering. You are entering on mute, but this is an interactive session, so feel free to use that chat function at the bottom of your Zoom window to ask questions. We're going to go ahead and introduce ourselves, but we'd love to hear who you are as well. So use that chat function to introduce yourself. Let us know your name, where you're joining us from, and your role in your organization. I'm Sandy Oseguera, and I'm the data product manager here at NHSA. I've been here for about a year and a half managing some of the tools we've created in-house, like Parent Gauge, which is used to enhance and track family engagement. And I'll let Mallory introduce herself also.
Thank you, Sandy. Hi, everyone. I'm Mallory Swartz, Senior Director of Research and Impact at Parent Powered. I've been an applied researcher in family engagement and early childhood for almost 25 years. And I've worked at family-focused organizations such as Start Early, Fred Rogers Productions, and Brazelton Touchpoint Center. I also served as co-principal investigator for the Office of Head Start National Center on Parent-Family Community Engagement.
Thanks, Mallory. So our goals for our session today are to create a shared understanding of what we mean when we say hard to reach families. We want to identify common barriers to family engagement and learn about inclusive strategies for reaching seldom heard families and making all families feel welcome and empowered to participate in their child's education. To do that, we're going to start with some context and level setting. Then we're going to go over the 3 key practices, which are reflection, inclusive outreach, and partnership. And for the last half of our session, we're going to break out into smaller groups to talk through and strategize your real world examples. And with that, I'll turn the mic back over to Mallory.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sandy. So as Sandy said, let's start with some context and level setting together. So through our work, we're often asked, how do you engage with families who aren't responding to engagement efforts? So I wanted us to take a moment to reflect together. Who comes to mind when you think of harder to reach families? Let's sit with that for just a second, and maybe if you could put some thoughts into the chat and we'll read a few out. So who comes to mind when you think of harder to reach families? I know people are still introducing themselves too. Oh, here they come. Yep. I see families experiencing homelessness, mental health challenges, refugee families, dads, working families, families with history of abuse. Yep. Oh gosh, these are great. Yep.
A
Do
lot of different experiences there.
Yep. I'm trying to keep up. Yeah. People have had DCF involved, ESL families. Thank you all so much for these ideas. Sandy, did you see anything else that you wanted to call out? Undocumented families, isolated families?
The single families or single parent families, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Can relate.
Mhm. Yeah, high trauma, high ACEs. Yep. Loneliness. This is wonderful. Thank you all so much. So we can see in your responses that families have unique situations, right? There's a lot to think about here. And so one example when Sandy and I were talking is we know that when a family's struggling to find shelter, right, their priority isn't going to be turning in a parent survey or attending a back to school night, but we want to honor those families and explore their options that would work for them to include their voices. So for years, families that we've not been able to connect with through traditional outreach methods have been thought of as hard to reach. And this phrase implies that families don't care or they're uncooperative. It also doesn't account for the unique barriers that families may face, as we just saw, right? There's a variety of those in accessing services and fails to recognize parents' perspectives and their strengths as well. So I want us to consider this quote and how it encourages us to think differently. Families are not hard to reach. It may be that our services are hard to reach. This simple but powerful statement demonstrates a shift in how we think about those families who we have thought of as harder to reach. And in fact, many families perceive services as hard to reach, or they may choose not to access them because they're not aligned with either their values, their needs, or cultures. And by shifting our perspective, we really have an opportunity to support a parent's rights to choose what's best for their families. And we can work to create effective family engagement approaches that value and demonstrate our respect for diversity. And we'll talk about this a little bit more later. So before we dive into our three practices, I wanted to call out two other themes that you'll hear repeatedly today, and those are accessibility and inclusivity. We'll talk about how, as professionals, we can work together to make sure that outreach efforts and services themselves are accessible and inclusive for all families that we work with. I also wanted to call out, so one other important piece of context that many of you might know about is that the Head Start program performance standards were recently updated in August of 2024. And while many of the updates were focused on workforce issues, there were also very thoughtful and important changes around several of the standards that impact our work with families. Many of the best practices and ideas we're going to discuss today are reflected in those changes, specifically around accessibility and acknowledgement of barriers. So we'll come back to this in a bit. I just wanted to flag it for you, but right now I'm going to turn it back over to Sandy.
Thanks, Mallory. So now that we have some context down, let's get into each of the three key practices for recognizing and expanding our reach to all families. And we're going to start with reflection. So reflection is a deliberate and systematic process for examining thoughts, actions, and experiences. Now, we know that every parent wants what's best for their child, but not every parent finds it easy to engage with their child's school or program. So we're going to focus on reflection as a tool to identify who's at the proverbial table and maybe even more importantly, who is missing to help us drive efforts to bring them a seat. Now, building a reflective practice into our family engagement efforts means we're taking a moment to become more emotionally aware so that we can exercise empathy when we inevitably find the barriers some families are facing. It also gives us the structure to think critically and problem solve because we do have to identify those gaps to fill them effectively. And ultimately, it gives us the opportunity or the ability to create opportunities to be more effective. You know, human nature drives us to look for the quick solution, but reflective practice invites us to really slow down so that we are not just reacting and instead we can increase our ability to be responsive. So, what do you think is the first step in engaging harder to reach families? It's really identifying who they are. We have to recognize who is missing. And to do that, we do have to slow down. The opposite of what a lot of us want to do when you have a mountain of work, but we have to slow down and take a step back so we can reflect on, the who and who isn't engaging with our program. There might be some families that come to mind immediately when we're talking about harder to reach families, but there might also be other parents that are flying under the radar. So this is where we'll dig in deeper to find out, are the families who are engaging with us reflective of all of the families we serve? Now, again, you probably already have an idea of who your harder to reach families are, but a reflective practice encourages us to get curious. So think about who is engaging and how does that compare to the families we serve? Are the demographics of the families who are responding to our surveys reflective of our whole program? When we look at who is missing, do they have anything in common? Are the barriers that they face that we know about, are they individual to that family, or is it something that is more widespread that might be facing multiple families? So to give you a practical example, this scale here is from a center that uses Parent Gauge to conduct parent surveys. And this scale in particular is summing up overall scores that parents ranked all around questions regarding their confidence levels. And we're getting an average here of 4.7 out of 5. So the parents that responded here, they're doing awesome. They feel good about their parenting skills, right? We're really close to that 5, which is a perfect mark. But one thing that caught my eye on this one in particular is that it's based on 15 interviews. And for this center in particular, I know they have at least 10 more families. So when I dug in deeper to look at the demographics of who responded to this survey, I noticed all of the families that responded were English speaking. And most of our families who had other native languages did not respond. So this is still valuable information, but it's really not representing the whole center. And now I can look for opportunities to reach out to those families that didn't respond, whether that's translating the survey or finding a different approach to engage with them. So each of you here today are coming from different programs with different populations. Like we saw in that question that Mallory asked, are harder to reach families, they're pretty diverse in themselves. So your participating families are also going to be different, but we can all incorporate reflective practice by building moments into our daily work to get curious dig deeper, and validate your assumptions. By consistently practicing reflection about our harder to reach families, we can build a more inclusive community that truly represents all our families. So for more information on reflection, there is a link in the chat. And now that we've talked about identifying our families, let's dig more into what you do next with Mallory.
Thank you so much, Sandy. So the next key practice that we wanted to talk about is inclusive outreach. And let's talk about what we mean by this first. So inclusive outreach focuses on increasing awareness of available services and promoting their use by intentionally seeking out families and working to ensure that all families are included. Head Start requires that programs establish and implement outreach and enrollment policies and procedures to ensure they are meeting the needs of all eligible families, including those who are pregnant, have disabilities, who are experiencing homelessness, who live in rural or remote areas, and dual language learners, among others, as many of you have named today. The purpose of inclusive outreach is to identify and share relevant information with families that are not being reached. Collecting, analyzing, and sharing data are central to ensuring that this is effective. Outreach also involves promoting culturally and linguistically responsive activities that raise families' awareness of high quality services, supports family well-being, and research-based practices to support child development and learning. So the other thing that I wanted to note here is that inclusive outreach happens at many levels. So as you can see kind of with these concentric circles on the right of the slide, this includes the family, the program, the community, and then the state, territory, or the tribal level. I wanted to provide just some concrete examples to get us thinking about this here. So for example, at the family level, that maybe that a parent shares a flyer with a neighbor about available services. Or at the program level, a center has a bulletin board to increase awareness of services, and they make sure to provide information about community organizations that they partner with, and they're written in families' home languages. At the community level, a child care resource and referral agency might promote outreach by working with community partners, and they could work together to review local data about enrollment in early childhood programs, and then make a plan to share that with families. And finally, at the state, territory, or tribal level, they might create a multilingual media campaign, for example, to share information about subsidies with families. So let's take a closer look at the particular factors that impact a family's access to and use of resources. So I've listed a lot of different ones on this slide. I'm not going to go through all of them, but do want to talk about a few of them. So at that system and program level, outreach may be impacted by the level of funding for outreach, the consistency and outreach efforts. So, and this might be affected by a lot of things like staff turnover or shifting program priorities. They're also often, as you probably well know, complicated application processes, including sometimes confusing terminology and redundant forms, and just a lot for parents to do and for you to do. Availability of staff that are skilled in listening and building relationships, and cultural and linguistic responsiveness. And communications are sometimes confusing or not in a family's home language, or they don't match their preferences for how they want to receive communications. And then at the family level, families may question the relevance of services. They may think that the support they're getting from family and friends is enough and they don't need other support. And they may feel fearful or of the unknown, or understandably distrustful of programs, of government agencies, of other families based on past experiences or their present circumstances. So how do we begin to address all of these things? So we can start, I'm going to harken back to what Sandy was talking about reflecting, right? We can reflect on our own programs and families. So we can think about what we already know and how might we learn more about the families that we're hoping to reach and the barriers they face. We can think about what can be addressed through messaging and outreach, but what other strategies could be effective. So for example, you could consider creating new policies and procedures or enhancing existing ones, providing staff development opportunities around identifying and removing these barriers, allocating resources and funding to outreach efforts, and also leveraging those community partnerships that are so crucial. Importantly, we need to meet families where they are. So this resource provides a list of research-informed strategies, and we'll put this in the chat for you. I also wanted to share one other thing that I found in my research that, this might seem like common sense, but is a pretty important thing, so I wanted to call it out. Research says that families prefer positive messages that affirm their roles as their children's first and most important teachers. And in contrast, messages that highlight deficits or challenges may not be as well received and can be stigmatizing. So we wanted to share with you a concrete example of a strategy that state, district, or school or program can use. So I work at Parent Powered. It's an evidence-based family engagement text messaging program designed to help families support their children's learning and development. And our program incorporates many of the strategies listed in the last slide to affirm families' roles as their children's first and most important teachers. Our messages are strengths-based. They're written in plain language at a third grade reading level, and they're offered in families' home languages whenever possible and culturally adaptive and responsive. So next, I want to move on to the third key practice. And I do want to say we will have time together to dig into these, as Sandy mentioned in our plan for today. We want to get, these lend themselves to discussion. So we want to give you guys a chance to do that in a bit. So we're just giving an overview of some of the practices for now. So this next one, third key practice is partnership. And so what do we mean by partnership? So in family partnerships, program staff and families build ongoing and respectful relationships and communication, and staff value families' expertise and work with them to better understand their goals. So these partnerships are based on mutual respect and trust. They focus on family strengths and require that professionals also appreciate differences among families and understand how their own experiences and beliefs that they bring to the work influence their work with families. Another thing to note is organizational context is also really important for establishing quality family partnerships. And this is best achieved when leaders model professional, caring relationships, when they share power, and when they establish relational trust. So I want here to do just another quick call out to the standards. And there's an entirely new section on family partnership in the revised standards that specifically addresses caseloads and how staff can collaborate with families to identify families' interests, their needs, and their aspirations. Staff and leaders can use the family partnership process as a tool for ongoing relationship building and as a basis for goal setting, for individualized family services, and also for follow-up. So as you can see, we put some of those resources in the chat for you. So I wanted to share too, kind of how we think about effective family partnerships at Parent Powered, and we think of them as having four primary characteristics. So first, as we've talked about family partnerships several times, right? They need to be strengths-based, and successful partnerships leverage families' unique relationships, their cultures, and their experiences. Next, partnerships need to be responsive to families' and communities' needs and strengths. So family partnerships, we think of them as kind of a living, breathing thing, right? That's co-created and involve lots of listening. Along these lines, we're going to talk about accessibility again, which is really key. Reaching families in their home language, giving them many ways to join in, and again, always noticing who's not at the table. And finally, we need to know if and how what we're doing is working. So it's important to base the strategies we choose in ongoing research, evaluation, and data from continuous quality improvement efforts. So as we engage in this partnership work, just wanting to note a couple of the questions that we can consider. We can consider, is this strategy or the communication I'm putting out accessible? Is it inclusive? Is it something that's doable? Is it strengths-based? And how does it feel to families? Is it collaborative? So just those are a few questions reflection questions you could think about for this practice. And then finally, I just kind of wanted to dive in more a little bit to the how to, right? So I want to share one specific strategy for effective partnerships. I touched on that very briefly a couple slides ago, and this is active listening. So according to the University of Rochester, active listening is defined as the ability to focus on a speaker, understand their message, comprehend the information, and respond thoughtfully. This slide lists some very specific things you can say or do, such as offering your full attention, reflecting back what you heard, and asking open-ended questions. And active listening takes practice, but it's a skill that can really set that tone for developing respect and trust. We've been talking about that about this as being key to successful partnerships with families. Our team is also going to put a link in the chat. Let's see. Oh, they already did. Thank you so much. To a blog post about active listening for those of you who might want to learn more about that. And we have gotten through kind of our first chunk of things. I think we're running a little early, guys, but I'm going to turn it over to Sandy to kind of introduce our next section of the presentation.
Thank you, Mallory. So we've covered a lot of ground, and I know both Mallory and we talk fast, so we're trying to tone it down, but we're gonna go into the next part of this session, which is breakout groups. I'm really excited about this, and we know that we're not the only ones thinking about this crucial topic. In fact, part of the reason we wanted to focus on this subject is that we heard from many programs that they've been focusing on this. So we know there's a wealth of experience and knowledge right here in this virtual room, and that each of you bring unique insights from your work with diverse families and communities. So now we want to tap into that collective wisdom for this breakout group activity. So we have you all assigned to groups with a facilitator. And as a group, I want you to think about the families you work with and discuss the following. Who are your harder to reach families? We had some of those responses earlier. So who are those harder to reach families? What do you know about their strengths? What specific barriers might they be facing? How might you partner with these families? And how could you reach out to them specifically? We want you to use those questions and your experience to come up with strategies to bring those families to the table. Some of you may have already found successful and effective strategies that work for engaging your harder to reach families, and we want you to share those here as well. So we're going to get broken out into groups here, and I believe it's going to show up, it should move you into that group directly.
Yeah, and I'm going to add just for our team and for everyone, we're going to take a little extra time in these groups, which we're excited about. As Sandy said, we both talk quickly, so we're probably going to take about 20 minutes
Okay.
in the groups to really dig in together. So thank you.
Yeah, so we'll come back at the 42 mark,
All right, you're going to
approximately.
be invited to join a breakout room. So get your mouse ready so you can click that join breakout room. All right, here we go. Mhm. I see folks are going into their rooms. If you missed that pop-up, that's okay. Or if you accidentally exit out, at the bottom of your toolbar, you'll see three dots that say more. You can click on that and find a breakout room, and that's where you'll be able to enter the breakout room. It's not giving you that option. Okay, let's try this again. All right, just bear with us. Good thing we were running a little early. That way we have time to troubleshoot breakout rooms. Thank you for your patience. It's automatically manually assigning us, so just give me a second and we'll get you all set up and into a breakout room. While you are waiting to get assigned, if you want to grab those questions from the chat, that is what you will be facilitating answering. All right, Kim, I see you have a hand up. Do you have a question? I'm sorry, folks, it is coming along. Um, we are slowly getting folks assigned to breakout rooms. If you see an assignment come your way, if you can please accept that and join the breakout room. They are coming. Because we broke them up into groups, it's causing it all to not go as automatically as we thought. All right, 36 people left to go. If you are getting assigned to a breakout room, if you can please click that breakout room to join. Thank you so much for all your patience today as we're getting you in that breakout room. There's some really rich conversation ahead of you. Thank you for your patience. Okay, everybody has been assigned to a breakout room. If you are not there yet, you may want to go to the bottom of your screen. There is a 3 dots with a more option, and that's where you should be able to enter your breakout room.
We're gonna go through each of the groups. Oops. We're gonna go through each group in order. So I was group one, and we had some really good conversations there. With the amount of people we had in each breakout group, of course, multiple different factors were coming into play when we say hard to reach families, right? For some, where we have teen parents who are just not engaging, and we're looking for ideas to help engage them. And one of the big ones was transportation, as is a common barrier, especially in those more rural areas. So we talked about that and what some of our programs are doing, which is partnering with families. In some cases, some of our programs were talking about how when they're talking to parents and having these parent engagement activities, they're encouraging parents to, bring up where they live, where are they from, what neighborhood are they in, and that way we can engage the parent community to help with transportation. In some cases, if we have families that are in similar or the same neighborhoods, that maybe they can give somebody a ride every once in a while, that kind of thing. Also, with parent engagement activities, the hours make a difference, especially with transportation, right? Sometimes it's work, sometimes it's transportation. For whatever case that is, having some engagement activities that are later can help with that attendance and bringing in certain people. And one thing that I think was brought up that I really liked this idea was some families are facing barriers where they can come, but they got to bring the whole family, right? They got to bring the siblings. And so some of our programs were talking about how they're saying, come, bring those siblings and we'll figure out what to do with them. We'll get an age appropriate activity for them to do so that we can increase that family engagement there. So lots of really good conversations there. And I think it really, for me, highlights how we really learn from each other, what's working in some programs and how can I take that so that it can work for mine too. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to our second group to talk about their highlights.
I think that's me. That's us. We had a really, really great conversation as well. So when we started out thinking about who our harder to reach families are, it was a wide range as well. Some folks working with refugee families, thinking about issues around language. Another thing that came up are families being always on the go, right? So there could be working families, it could be families that have other things that are going on, other activities, and that those parents are sometimes distracted, right, with all the things that they have going on. We talked about parents and families who might be in crisis, and this could mean a lot of different things. It could be that they're dealing with domestic violence, or they're facing homelessness. They are, having mental health, struggling with mental health issues, or we talked, another thing that our group talked about specifically was social anxiety, and that came up for families as well, especially since COVID. And then someone brought up that fathers can be hard to reach too. So there were a lot of different solutions. We also talked about some strengths that I did want to share too, before I jump into the solutions. But so yeah, someone said there were a couple of things here that, like, a lot of these families might be facing a lot, but they don't give up. So how do you build on that, right? Like, that's their strength, that they're resilient and they don't give up, and they're continuing to navigate these situations, even though sometimes they have to fall down before they get up. So some of the things we talked about were the differences between kind of navigating between like Gen X and Gen Z, and thinking about getting creative and how we reach families. So we talked about using apps, using text messaging. We talked about things that we've been talking about that I've, for a while, like if you can, offering food to get people to events, but also realizing that oftentimes you don't need someone to come in person to engage, for them to engage, right? So being creative in ways to reach families kind of where they are. A couple other really interesting things that came up were Bob shared that he's heard about a program that had a retired military person working with serving kind of as a mentor for dads, which was pretty powerful and interesting. And they felt like, oh, this is great. This is someone who doesn't look down on us. This is someone who's here for us. And anyway, I could keep going, but it was a wonderful conversation, and we will definitely share things out with you all.
Thank you, Mallory. I am so glad that you highlighted determination and perseverance as the strengths that the families we see in families, even though they can be harder to reach. That was also a theme that we had in our group. A few things I want to highlight. There was a lot of similarities between what you and Sandy said, but that oftentimes it's more than one factor that's making a family harder to reach. So they might be experiencing mental health challenges. There might be some challenges with disability. There could be some behavioral or health challenges with their child, and transportation, and a language barrier. So you sort of have to get a whole picture of each family. Something else that was elevated was just creating trust. Something that can make it really hard to reach some families is that they have not experienced success within a system. They do not trust the system and have chosen to sort of live on the fringes, has one person shared. And we got into sort of some ways to build trust. And I want to highlight, it was that first moment of contact. And we say this at Parent Powered too. That family's first moment in your building, whoever they talk to first, who's helping them fill out their paperwork, if that is a great experience, it can really build from there. And also people's willingness within the Head Start community to be vulnerable about their own experiences and their own stories to build connection and trust with families. A common theme was language barriers and cultural barriers. And we highlighted how AI sometimes works, so machine translation sometimes works, but can't always be trusted, which is, it's good to know. And then we also, another person shared that they actually can try to hire people from the same language or cultural background into the organization to better support families. And then we had a little conversation about really orienting families to sort of the unique aspects of being educated in the United States, because it can really vary widely from what people may have experienced in their home countries. And we talked about so much more, but I don't want to hog the screen. So we'll pass it off to Rebecca.
All right. So we identified and really honed in on strategies to address three key areas. So one, barriers related to language and representation. The next was barriers related to time. And the next were barriers related to transportation. So to quickly go through some of the brilliant sort of things that our participants were implementing to address these barriers. First, related to language and representation, one participant shared that they have a multicultural specialist who comes with families to meetings. Ideally sort of travels with families on their journey. Also, they make a point, mention making a point of introducing this specialist during open house and letting families know this person's going to be reaching out to you to kind of help create that trust and bridge that reach out. Another participant mentioned the role that music plays in their events, that just like a wonderful way to sort of signal inclusion and allow families to see themselves represented in the fabric of the school. And another participant mentioned always having translation as being a key sort of barrier mitigator when it comes to language and representation. When we talked about time, a theme that came up was the importance of letting families know when you're available, so that they're not trying to reach out during times when you can't be reached, which becomes a major time-saving activity, but also that could be flipped and that we could be asking families when they're available and including that information in their intake forms so that we have it readily available when we go to reach out to them. Let's see, when we talked about transportation as a barrier, one participant mentioned that they have a program with a church who handles transportation, which actually, so they let families know about the service, but families sign up on their own, which makes sort of places, does not allow them to carry the liability, which I know is a concern for all of us. So as a way to kind of offer a service and not have to navigate liability. We also talked there was a van available in some communities. Other participants mentioned having a program called Home Base. So if a family doesn't have transportation, it means someone is coming to the family to work with them on positive discipline and breathing strategies and all manner of parenting supports that families find helpful. So those were a few things that came up for us.
All right, and group 5 was amazing. Group 5 was all the way live. I love my group. I think group 2 kind of copied our notes because we had very similar points as group 2, Mallory. But we also said that families who speak other language or new to America were some of the parents that they had trouble getting to be involved. We also mentioned teen parents as a demographic, and grandparents who are taking care of their grandkids as also a demographic, especially those grandparents who are not as tech savvy. We spoke about working parents and mentioned more specifically single fathers who are working and how it was difficult to reach them, especially parents who are working the third shift and maybe sleeping during the daytime and how it might be difficult for them. And we also spoke about families who are uncomfortable or don't trust staff and may not feel like the staff is being honest with them, and may have not have had a positive experience in the past. We spoke about those parents are hard in engaging also. We mentioned that these parents, our first point also was their resilience and how they are protective of their children and want to be strong advocate for their children. Many of them want to support their children and help them in their education, but may not know where to start. Some of the barriers that we spoke about was homelessness, mental health, transportation, financial and food security, parent education, childcare, and some parents may have intense social anxiety, especially since the COVID time frame. We spoke about a lot of solutions. Many of our solutions spoke about different technology and different apps that we're utilizing to communicate with parents and keep them updated on their child's performance through the various apps. We mentioned Remind, Cambu, I believe it was called, and Learning Genie as some of the apps that we utilize. We also spoke a bit about Parent Powered and the support that it provides parents. And also we spoke about utilizing translation, either translation apps or utilizing translation services to make sure that from the beginning, we're able to communicate with those parents, understand their need, and keep them updated throughout as the year progresses. And that was group 5 and what we discussed.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for chiming in, and to all of our participants for being vulnerable with us and talking about your real life experiences working through some of these barriers. I think Fran had a really good quote there about barriers kind of compounding, right? And how we, at the end of the day, we are working with the whole family to help remove those. So thank you so much to everyone for sharing that. We do in the PowerPoint have a couple of additional resources that programs have shared with us that they're using to broaden their reach to diverse families. So this might help you with some of those things that we were talking about. You will have access to this PowerPoint through your email later when we send out that email. We're also doing an additional session on Parent Gauge and Parent Powered specifically if you want to learn more about those tools later on this month. And Mallory and I are really invested in this subject. We're actually using some of these notes that we're taking to help us come up with more resources on this subject. So we are going to be at the Parent and Family Engagement Conference doing another session. Feel free to register for that. Come see us. We would love to meet you in person. And again, thank you very much for your time today. As the Zoom closes, you're going to get a short survey. Please respond to that, and have a great Tuesday.
Thanks, everybody.